Hello and welcome to Yahoo News' TikTok Live. Today we are talking all things infrastructure and we're joined by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thank you so much for being here with us and welcome to TikTok. We understand it's your first interview on the platform.
That's true. This one's new for me. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. So let's jump right in. The Biden administration's American Jobs Plan has sparked some debate over what infrastructure really means. And we know that you can do this in under 15 seconds if you have to, but what is your definition of infrastructure?
Yeah, so I think of infrastructure as the foundation that makes it possible for us to live lives of our choosing. And traditionally, that's a lot of physical resources. It's roads, it's bridges. Infra means under, right? So you think about things like pipes, a classic example of something you don't think about it every day. And actually, the less you have to think about it, the better, because that means it's working for you. But if it's not working, you're in trouble. And the reason we think we need to make such a big investment in infrastructure is that we haven't made the investments we need to in a very long time. But we think anything that goes toward making it possible for you to live your life, anything that's part of that foundation that you should be able to count on without even having to think about it that much, that's infrastructure and it needs work.
Thank you. So we know the bill includes plans to expand broadband access, and I want to talk about how 12 million kids are underconnected, according to some recent reports, meaning they lack consistent internet access, which of course is important in this age of virtual schooling, hybrid schooling. How will the Biden administration provide reliable internet access for students? And who will it serve first? Which communities will it serve first?
So one of the best things about the plan is it includes provisions to get 100% of Americans to have a good, fast, affordable broadband connection. As you said, this is especially important for young people because, look, this is not a luxury and this is not just for fun. You need it to do your homework. You need it to be connected into your school, especially in the pandemic. But frankly, even when we're back to more of a in real life interactions in all of our schools, you still need it to do assignments, and you definitely need it to plug into the bigger economy. Try applying for a job now without an internet connection. So that's why we think it has to be 100%. Yes, that takes a big investment, but in the same way that in the 1950s they made a big investment in an interstate highway system at a time when it used to take up to 2 weeks to get from one coast to the other in a car, and they said that under Eisenhower, we've got to fix this. We've got to connect the country. Now, you definitely need a highway connection in order to participate in the economy. You need an internet connection too. We got to do both.
Could you talk a little bit more just exactly how the internet plans would roll out and which communities it would serve first?
Well, so it's got to be every community, and it's not like we're going to pick one state this year and do another state the next. There is going to be a focus on those who have been overburdened and underserved, right? We know that disproportionately it's been in communities of color. That we haven't had often good or affordable connections. Also rural areas, right? Those have been among those that have been left out. So we've got to look at where the need is and go there. But again, the beauty of 100% is we're not picking and choosing, leaving people wondering if their community is going to get served. That's why and by the way, the last, after you get to 98%, that last couple is going to be tough. But the reason the president's saying everybody means everybody is so nobody has to wonder whether this has something in it for them. This is to get as many people connected as soon as possible.
So one of the things you mentioned as a reason it's important for young people to have internet access was jobs. What should young people know about the American Jobs Plan, and how will it help millennials, Gen Z, those younger generations get their first jobs?
Well, here's what I would say. The longer you're planning to be here, the younger you are, the more you have riding on these decisions for two sets of reasons. One of them has to do with directly the jobs it's going to create. So we're making sure that there are jobs, by the way, for people with and without college degrees. Independent estimates suggest millions of jobs that will be created if we pass this plan. Electric vehicles, I see a picture of me with an electric vehicle right there. We got to make sure that the electric vehicles of the future are made in the United States, because that's going to create a ton of jobs, manufacturing jobs, programming jobs, and everything in between. A lot of this is just the physical work of building the bridges and the roads that we're talking about, but also the care economy, investing in care, because often young people will find that they might be called to take care of an older relative, and that could prevent them from being able to enter the workforce. So there's all of those direct issues related to jobs, but then there's the other piece, which is climate. So the transportation sector is the biggest part of greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere out of our economy. And the younger you are, again, the more your life is going to be affected by whether we succeed or whether we fail at getting to net zero by the middle of the century. Because we'll have more storms, we'll have more extreme weather events, we'll have more droughts, we'll have more, frankly, devastation to our economy and our livelihoods and our lives. And so making the right choices now, building an infrastructure that's going to lead to less carbon emissions is also more important for the young people than anyone, because the ability to prosper in the future is going to depend on whether we have a healthy planet and a healthy environment to live in.
So clearly climate initiatives are a big part of this plan. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your personal habits and how you're personally adapting to what the Biden administration is asking Americans to do. So, for example, looking at the push for electric vehicles, do you have or do you plan to buy an electric car yourself?
Yeah, so we're in the market right now, actually, and that's for us as a household. There's just some really amazing American-made vehicles coming onto the market. And by the way, that's the ones you're used to thinking about when you think about EVs, smaller cars, but they're making pickup trucks. I mean, it's amazing the things that are hitting in the next couple of years, and you're not sacrificing quality. I mean, these are some of the coolest vehicles going onto the market. Now, that being said, there's an affordability issue, right? And that's part of why what's in the American Jobs Plan is to make it easier for people to afford these vehicles. And then you get to benefit from the fuel savings because it's cheaper to use electricity than it is to fuel them up. So I do what I can to walk the walk, but really it's going to take policy choices to make this available for Americans. This can't be a luxury. This has to be a shift in the fundamentals of our economy that creates more opportunity for people.
Could you go into detail a little bit more about what will happen to make it easier and more accessible for people to get those electric cars?
Yeah, so two sets of things. First of all, making them more affordable. So that's where tax incentives, rebates, things that actually reduce the upfront price that you would pay or the payment that you're going to have to own an electric vehicle. That's really important. Eventually, these things are going to be cheaper. In fact, they're moving in that direction now, but they aren't there yet. And we want to drive widespread adoption quickly. And we want to do that, again, so everybody can take advantage of it, but also so that we drive a market where those things are made in the U.S. We want to see workers, union workers, I hope, making these vehicles on American soil. So that's part one. Part two has to do with the range. So even if you decide that you're going to save money compared to buying an older type of vehicle and you're ready to go on an electric vehicle, you might think twice if you're not sure that you can take the kind of trips that you can count on. If you drive a long stretch at a time, if you're looking at road trips or you live in a rural area where you need to cover a lot of ground. That's why we got to build charging infrastructure. So the plan builds 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations around the country. And in our department, we're laying out what we call alternative fuel corridors, basically designating along our highways where these things could go so that you could confidently say, even if you're driving hundreds and hundreds of miles, you know exactly where you need to stop in order to make sure you charge up. And that stops being a barrier to adopting these vehicles. And by the way, this isn't just about families and households, right? We've got to electrify the vehicle fleet of the federal government. We got to make it make sense for business to move in this direction. And all of those things get easier when we have that kind of charging network.
That's an excellent point. And especially, when you're looking at those road trips, I'd love to talk more about the charging stations and the implementation of that. What does it take to create a plan like that rollout for those charging stations, and how will you address the cities specifically? For example, I'm in New York City, and I was trying to imagine how we would add those charging stations when it's already so crowded. How do you address the charging stations, especially for urban cities?
Yeah, so it's going to be different in different areas, and we have to partner with cities in order to make it easier, right? In some parts of the country, it's easy. People can charge their vehicles at home most of the time. You got a detached house with a garage there, great. A little different if you're in a dense urban area. That's why we got to make sure that when you have apartment buildings, that there are ways to connect in there. Retail locations. We just did an event at Union Station here in Washington, D.C., where maybe somebody wouldn't live in an area where they could have a charging station at home, but when they're running errands or doing something at Union Station, shopping there, they could get a fast charge. Another thing that we've got to do is work with cities to make sure there's on-street parking. with electric vehicle charging stations. We actually did the first couple of those in our city when I was mayor, and it's exciting to see that growing. But again, we got to help. We can't expect cities to be on their own. We definitely can't expect individuals to be on their own figuring this out. We have to have a federal policy that supports the deployment of these charging stations.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you're on the market yourself for an electric vehicle. Are you eyeing anything in particular? Have you taken any test drives yet?
Yeah, so Chas and I have been looking at a lot of the products that are out there. I'm going to be careful as a federal official not to show favoritism to one brand or another, but what I'll tell you is it's amazing. I mean, if you just look up electric vehicles, and again, look at the whole range from a small car that can get you around a city if you're taking short trips to bigger vehicles that are going to be suitable for people doing some pretty heavy duty stuff with pickup trucks in rural areas. There are a lot of options that we should be very proud of because so many of them are coming from American companies with American workers.
So we know that you're in the market for this electric vehicle. We also know that we've seen you biking around DC, but some Americans have criticized the fact that there was an SUV that followed you along for the ride. What's your response to that criticism?
Yeah, I mean, I have a security detail, so it is what it is. But I still love biking to work. I do it. I'm not going to say I do it every day, but I do it a lot of days. Frankly, it just kind of wakes me up a little bit, makes me feel a little more connected to the neighborhood or the environment or the city that I'm in. And we want to encourage more people to do that. I mean, think about it, not just from a green perspective, obviously a little different in my case, but for most people, it could really shift your carbon profile, but also from a health perspective, even just that little bit of movement in a short commute can do a lot of good. And definitely from a congestion perspective. I mean, just stop and think about how much space 10 bicycles take up compared to 10 cars, right? And you quickly see that the more people are getting to work that way, the better. Now, this, just like the other stuff we were talking about, this is an example of how, yeah, individual habits matter, but so does policy. I want to encourage, and I do encourage more people to bike to work. I think it's a great thing to do. It's good for you. If you plan and dress appropriately, you can do it in every kind of weather. But the truth is, we've also got to make choices to lay out our cities and our streets and our neighborhoods in ways that make it easier to bike to work and safer to bike to work. It's why bike lanes are so important. It's why signage is so important. It's why making sure drivers pay attention if there's an area where they're not used to seeing a lot of bikes on the road, but it's happening more and more. It's why that matters. And working with employers who can make it a lot easier for their employees to bike to work by providing shower facilities, for example, or just something as simple as bike parking, right? So I'm a big fan of that. But again, we can't ask individuals on their own to carry this load. We got to encourage people to do things that are beneficial and make policy choices that make it easier, just like we got to make it easier to get electric vehicles. And for that matter, make it easier not to need a vehicle at all, whether it's a bike or a car, by making sure we have better opportunities for transit. That's why the president's jobs plan doubles the federal funding for public transit in this country.
So do you have a car right now?
So I've got my Chevy back home, but I'm not driving it much because the way I get around now. But yeah, and again, we're also looking at electrifying the federal fleet, right? I mean, you think about, I guess, as a Department of Transportation, we don't have that many cars in the grand scheme of things, but we want to be leading by example. And then you look at, the Postal Service, the Department of Defense. I mean, just the government alone owns and operates a lot of vehicles. And that's something the president's pushing us to look at too. How do we get those electric? Again, hopefully in a way that creates a lot of jobs.
So I want to move to equity next, and the questions of equity and infrastructure and how they work together. You've said that racism is physically built into U.S. infrastructure, and we know there are highways that divide communities of color, leaving them without affordable transportation options or causing them to suffer from the most highway pollution. How do you plan to make transportation in these communities more equitable? Do highways get torn down? What is the future of equitable infrastructure, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so this is really important, understanding the history of the relationship between federal transportation dollars and policies and what's happened in neighborhoods. The simple truth is there is case after case after case where a highway was routed in such a way that it wound up dividing a white neighborhood from a black neighborhood and enforced segregation, or it just mowed down a black neighborhood or a community of color that might have been thriving, or it cut a neighborhood in two. All of these are things that we need to pay attention to. And when I say that racism has been physically built into these structures, that's what I'm talking about. Now, when I raise this, it's not to make people feel guilty. It's to point out that we can do something about it this time. And it's exactly the kinds of things you just mentioned. In some cases, it has made sense to take what had been a highway cutting a neighborhood in half and actually put it underground and reclaim the land over it for the community. Other times, maybe that's not practical, but what you can do is route ways for pedestrians to get around over or under in a way that's safe and inviting and clean. The solutions are going to look different in a lot of different places, but what we know is that we have to make choices that lead to greater and not worse economic and racial equality and justice with the choices that we make. And this is another thing that's a big part of the plan. There's a Justice 40 initiative, which means that 40% of the kinds of investments we're making on things like climate improvements need to go to underserved and overburdened communities that have really, frankly, been carrying the burden of everything from pollution to inequitable transit spending for a very long time.
So you've almost gone to my next question, which is, are there any innovative ideas about the future of transportation infrastructure that you could share with us? Anything really cutting edge that is in the works?
Oh, absolutely. There's so many things going on. We can start from kind of small to large. So there's what's called micro mobility. I mean, you're seeing more and more of these scooters that are out there. You're seeing e-bikes and ways to get around that don't involve a vehicle. Then you're seeing the vehicles themselves are getting smarter. We got electric vehicles. We're also seeing a lot of automation of vehicles being developed technologically. Our job is to make sure that it's safe and that it works, but eventually that could change everything. Think about what it would mean for young people or frankly for seniors, right? Who, if the car comes and gets you without you having to drive it, that could be a profound shift. Maybe not in the next couple of years, but before too long. And we got to be getting ready for it.
Are there any other countries that you're looking to as examples of places that are getting this right when it comes to green initiatives, when it comes to equity and infrastructure?
Yeah, different countries have different excellences. On trains, for example, Japan is famously very good at fast trains. So is Spain. People don't know about that as much. And China, which is important, I think, from a competitiveness perspective, to make sure we're not falling behind what our allies and our competitors are doing, because they're providing remarkable levels of service. And I think U.S. citizens ought to have high expectations for what we have here in the U.S. If you look at areas like bike commuting, we were talking earlier about getting around on two wheels. You look at what they're doing in Amsterdam, in Copenhagen. If you look at safety, Oslo had almost zero fatalities in a city of more than 500,000 people. So we got to learn from them. There are a lot of countries that are creative in terms of how you pay for these things. So no one country is perfect, but what we know is that the U.S. shouldn't be too proud to learn from other countries, especially now that we're out of the top 10. We're actually ranked 13th right now for transportation infrastructure. And, maybe it's just my competitive instinct, but I always want to see the U.S. number one. And that's part of why we got to make these investments the president's pushing Congress to do.
Right. And so specifically, you mentioned China as in the competitiveness factor. And we've seen as the Biden administration continues to promote its infrastructure plan that it's positioned China as a threat to the U.S. But at the same time, over the past few months, we've seen the reported rise in anti-Asian sentiment and attacks on Asian Americans. Is it a mistake to use anti-China rhetoric to push this plan?
I think the point is that we need to be keeping up with all of our competitors, whether it's a strategic competitor like China, whether it's our allies in Europe. We should be doing the best. Now, look, we've got some real and very serious and very meaningful differences with China on human rights, on democracy. And I think we can be very serious about that and trade issues that come up, and at the same time make it absolutely crystal clear that anti-Asian hate, anti-Asian racism has absolutely no place in America. That any American, but certainly any Asian American, should have no reason to question their belonging based on who they are, or where they come from, or how they look, or whether they've been here for generations, or whether there's a different language spoken at home. Everybody belongs in this country, and hate has no home here, and that is something that we can and must be absolutely crystal clear about, no matter what's going on with international relations with China or any other country.
Secretary Buttigieg, I just want to thank you for being so generous with your time. We have a few more questions for you that are high speed, no pun intended. So in 20 seconds, what's a day in the life of a cabinet secretary look like?
Well, 20 seconds. It's a lot of conversation with a lot of different kinds of people. Inside, it's talking about policies and decisions. Outside, it's talking to Congress, talking to the public, media opportunities like this, and hopefully, increasingly, a lot of travel. I'm the Secretary of Transportation. It's driving me nuts to be behind a desk so much. It's the right thing to do with a lot of the COVID safety protocols. But as it becomes safe to get out on the road, that's going to be a big part of my day, too.
What's your favorite mode of transportation?
Personally, I love being on two wheels. I'm not claiming to be a big cyclist or anything, but it's a great way to start the day. But I'm really excited about some of the stuff coming in the future too. We may not be into jetpacks just yet, but some of the things coming down the pike with commercial space travel or automated vehicles, it's pretty futuristic.
And we wanted to highlight two questions from our TikTok audience. When might we see high-speed rail in the United States?
Well, it can't come soon enough, I'll tell you that. And there are projects. There's a project underway in California. There's a project underway in Texas. This is not just a blue state or coastal city thing. And there's a lot of work we got to do on the Northeast Corridor where we have the Acela trains, but we could be doing a lot more. Again, this is one of the reasons, you'll hear me say this again and again, it's one of the reasons it's so important to pass the American Jobs Plan, because it contains the resources to lay in more of these routes, kickstart high-speed rail in this country, and demonstrate that Americans can have just as good or better trains than anyone else in the world if we choose to.
And another from one of our users, will you run again for president one day?
Oh, I have no idea. I'll tell you, I love my job, and being able to work on things that are this important and that I think are going to matter for the rest of my life. We're going to be looking back at the early 2020s and the choices we make. It's just an incredible opportunity. But I have no idea what the future is going to bring. I just know that I got to do a good job right now.
And for our last question, what has been the most surprising or unanticipated thing so far in your new role as Transportation Secretary?
I think just the range of things you work on, even in a department that sounds like it does a very specific thing, right? Transportation, you're like, okay, planes, trains, automobiles, got it. We're responsible for pipeline safety. We deal with hazardous materials, and the president's asking us to be involved in a lot of other things that just cut across the different departments, like climate, like supporting the COVID response. So I guess the biggest thing is just finding that every hour, every minute, sometimes it's something different. But that's what I love about this job. If you're a curious person, and if you care about all the different ways that policy choices can shape people's lives, you never run out of things to work on. The only hard part really is deciding what not to do, because there's only so many hours in the day.
Secretary Buttigieg, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you everyone on TikTok who tuned in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me.